Hello. Part 2, since we had an earlier webinar today as well for our friends over in the UK, and that was live, and that was quite fun actually. So enjoyed that. Good to be here with all of you once again. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And as always, it is our Wednesday night webinar brought to you by OCD. OCD, a downloadable app you can get through Google Play or iOS. Please feel free to download that app for free. We have the largest online community of people with OCD in the world, and we provide teletherapy across the US, and we are also in Canada and the UK and Australia. And in the US, we're getting more and more insurance companies all the time who are covering us, and some specials going on for those of you who are outside of the US. So if you're looking for therapy outside the US, we've got some really, really cool deals available right now that if you, by the end of this year, sign up and do your first session, all sessions for the first 3 months that you will do, if you do your first session by the end of the year, all sessions for your first 3 months will be only $100 US. So we're excited about that, because we are trying to get on insurance panels outside of the US as well. It takes a little bit longer and everything too. So we understand that. And so that's our little gift to all of you outside of the US, to come and give OCD a try for your teletherapy needs for obsessive compulsive disorder. Maybe you've heard of it. Maybe that's why you're here. So let's jump in, as we always do. We have some questions coming in already, so thank you, everyone. Richard says, good evening. Good evening to you, Richard, as well. Once again, because of the trickery OCD plays, it is a tricky thing, isn't it? On you, you're in fear and anxiety most of the time, especially when you're doing imaginal exposures by yourself. This imaginal exposure is extremely difficult to do in the midst of fear. OCD begins to set rules as to how to do the exposure, and it is very distracting and fear-inducing. Richard, let me ask you one question, which would be, why do you have to follow any rules that OCD sets out? I mean, what could OCD do to you if you don't follow a rule, other than annoy you, right? And it will annoy you. It will try to scare you. It will tell you all sorts of things. But Richard, how many of those things are actually true? How many of them are real, right? Now, your OCD will say all of them will become true and all of them will be real, or it will say, what if they become true and what if they become real? And wouldn't it be best just to do what I tell you to do? Look, these compulsions, they take very little time of your life. They're no big deal whatsoever. I mean, come on. It's just a compulsion. Why not just do it and just get it over with and then not have to worry about it ever again? I mean, wouldn't that just be great? Why not? Go ahead and come on. That's all it is. Tiny little thing. Just do it. And that's how it tricks you. That's how it gets you to do its bidding. And that's how people stay stuck in OCD, because they're so concerned of the what if experience that overtakes everything else. And can I live with the what if experience is really people's fear. You know, how can I live with knowing that there's a possibility of something? Now, as I said in my webinar earlier today, If nobody could live with the possibility that something could go wrong, then no one would ever drive after today. There are car accidents every single day on the planet. Every single day. So, since there's a chance that we could be in a car accident tomorrow, wouldn't it be best that all of us just never drive? And then we will eliminate the possibility of any car accidents ever happening. Okay. That is how you stop car accidents. You prevent anyone from ever driving ever again. Right? Or do we go out and we take our chance, knowing that, yes, it is a possibility that I could get into a car accident. The probability's low, right? But it is a possibility. Of course, OCD means possibility equals probability, and they are the same. So I just want everyone to really keep this in mind, that we can really see a ton of interference in our lives, right? If we do everything that OCD wants us to do, and we're at its bidding all the time. Because the bidding of OCD is never really anything good, It's always just to bring about some kind of immediate relief right now, at the expense of anything, right? Because OCD doesn't care what the expense of it is. OCD just cares that it's satisfied. So if OCD says, I know you said that prayer for an entire hour, but there was one word that you kind of flubbed a little bit. I think it's just best that we start it all over again and do it again. Or, yeah, you washed your hands, you did a great job, but do we really? Boy, I don't really remember. Maybe as you were turning off the faucet, yeah, you used your elbow, but maybe your hand slipped a little and your pinky touched the faucet, and maybe dirty hands touch the faucet ever so. It's maybe another half hour hand washing is in order here, just in case, of course, that might have happened. So when we do this, I think you can understand, as I speak that way too, right? All that doubt and uncertainty coming through there. OCD hates doubt and hates uncertainty. And yet, because it's the doubting disorder, never accepts doubt or never accepts any kind of certainty whatsoever. It will only doubt everything. So you can't satisfy the insatiable disorder, and you stay stuck. So, yes, Richard, it's very fear-inducing, but that is the goal of OCD, and to scare you into doing its bidding. And even though it does that, you don't have to. Right? Think of virtual reality, which can be very frightening. Right? To walk out on this plank, which is 26 stories in the air. And when you're looking down, it sure feels real, but the reality is you could take a step forward. And though you will see yourself falling in virtual reality, you have never left the ground. You have stayed in the same place the entire time. Right? Virtual reality tricks your brain, and OCD tries to do that as well. OCD might be the crappiest virtual reality program ever invented, but it's kind of how it works. Crappie says, my OCD compulsions comes as a severe urge to do the compulsion, and you try not to, but your anxiety is up to a 10. You feel like you get a sign to do the compulsion, like if you don't do it, you will trip at some point. Or how do you stop OCD? So similar to the previous answer there, Crappie, of the sign, again, is all a part of OCD's trickery on you to do this compulsion. If OCD needs to take it up a notch, it is the disorder that is going to take it up a notch, right? It will do all that it can do to get you to do what it wants you to do. And what does it want you to do? It wants you to do a compulsion. Why? Because you experienced an intrusive thought or image or urge, which OCD says you shouldn't have experienced, parentheses, but OCD caused you to have it in the beginning anyway, close parentheses. And so it's a perpetual motion machine, right? I've drawn the circle with people in the past, but I'll do it again. So OCD says, hey, don't think about this. And so you think about it. And then OCD is like, oh, I told you not to think about it. I'm going to punish you for it. So now you're going to feel bad and awful and horrible, and says, okay, well, if you want to get back in my good graces, do this compulsion. So you do the compulsion. And eventually OCD says, all right, that was an acceptable compulsion. Now, in order to remain in my good graces, remember, don't do that thing. And then boom, you're on it again. And it is the hamster wheel of hell that is just going around and around and around and around and around. And you're stuck on it. And the only way to get off is to say, I'm just not going to do what OCD wants me to do, because doing what OCD wants me to do doesn't seem to have helped me. It's helped my OCD get worse, but it hasn't done a darn thing for me whatsoever. It hasn't actually helped me at all. So something to keep in mind. Just recognize that. Sarah says, should I continue with my ERP even if I'm not feeling any anxiety? I feel numb sometimes. What does that mean? I'm so confused. Can ERP make me not care about the things that scare me? How do I stop ruminating? Isn't that just like trying to stop a thought? It's kind of impossible. So those are the two from Sarah. Yeah, well, obviously stopping a thought is impossible. I would never try to get somebody to stop a thought, because I don't know how to stop a thought, much less have anybody else stop a thought. So it's not about stopping a thought. It's about not caring about the fact that a thought is there and not giving much time or attention to it at all, right? But recognizing it. So I've given the example here. I'll do it again, that I have tinnitus. So though none of you hear it, I hear a very high-pitched sound right now. What should I do to stop that sound? Or can I still do this webinar even though that sound is there? And there's, to me, no difference really between the fact that it might be a thought, or it might be an image, or it might be an urge, or it might be a noise, or it might be a feeling, or whatever it might be. It's, how do I sit with something uncomfortable? How do I live with something uncomfortable and not give into the trickery that says you can alleviate that by doing this thing, which might bring about instantaneous gratification, but in the long term actually makes you feel worse, right? So do you want to do what in the long term makes you feel worse just to feel good in the moment? Or are you willing to be uncomfortable in the moment and learn that you can handle things feeling better in the long run by allowing yourself to know that it's okay to be uncomfortable in the long run, right? Which sounds weird, right? Wait, I can be more comfortable by being okay with being uncomfortable? Yes, absolutely. That's the way the treatment works. That's the way the cookie crumbles in this one. That's how all of this functions. Now, going back to your first one, should you continue with ERP if you're not feeling any anxiety? You feel numb sometimes. What does that mean? Now, there's a couple of things with that. Sometimes people will say, well, now my OCD is so worried that I think of something that used to bother me and now it doesn't bother me anymore. Does that mean that I really like that thing, or I really want that thing? What am I going to do now? You know what the problem really is? And it to me, it isn't about if you like that thing or you don't like that thing or what that means. What it really, the issue is that OCD is getting you to overthink everything. You're overthinking everything. Do I not like this enough? Do I like this too much? Is there a right or wrong level of like to have about this thing in order for everything to be okay? What if I do think about this too much? What if I don't have enough negative reaction to this thought, but I do have too much of a numbness to this thought? What does all of that mean? The reality of it is that people without OCD just don't spend time thinking those things. That is not on their radar. And that may sound really, really weird to those of you who have OCD. You may think, wait a minute, are you telling me, are you really telling me, McGrath, that there are people in the world who have things pop into their head and don't assign meaning to it and don't spend a ton of time and attention on it? And the answer is yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Totally 100%. That's what it's like to live without OCD, is to allow for thoughts just to kind of come and then go without having to put them through the OCD machine, shall we say, of running it through. Now there's that. What does that mean? And that means that, and that could mean that or that. Now let's run the permutation of that. So if that were to go that way, then I got to think this, and that could lead to this or that. But if I didn't do that and it went this way, then that could be that or that. And do I like that or that more? But maybe if I like that more, that's bad about me. And maybe I should like this one more, but I have to do this thing first, which I'm not as sure about or liking as much. So maybe, is there a way to go this way, but then lead over there? But no, does that mean I'm cheating or doing it the wrong way? So maybe I've got to go back to the beginning and first. And boy, wouldn't it be easier if I just did the compulsion and didn't have to worry about any of this stuff, and that would be the way that it would be. Now, does that sound familiar to anybody? I'm thinking it probably does, right? Because that can very much be the way that OCD runs the gamut in the brain. Right? So, Sarah, it's not that ERP is causing you to not care about the things that scare you, right? ERP's goal is just to get you to recognize that you can handle anything that pops into your head the same way, which is, oh, okay. And I'm thinking the underlying meaning in your question is that not caring about the things that scare you doesn't mean, let's say if you have, scrupulosity OCD, it doesn't mean that now we're trying to get you to not be afraid of thoughts of hell or anything like that. We're trying to get you to recognize this is all OCD and you just don't need to pay attention to it or don't care about it, right? That's where we're trying to go. I hope that differentiation makes sense. Okay. Natalie says, Dr. McGrath, first off, thank you so much for doing these lives. Well, of course, Natalie, happy to be here. You have somatic OCD. Any tips on how to cope and doing ERP? So Natalie, this can come in many forms. It could be things like you're focusing on your breathing or your blinking or the position of your body or how does your skin feel or does there feel like there's something wrong with me or anything. So there's lots of ways that you might see somatic OCD kind of things coming. I would say more than anything, the tips in doing this are to be able to sit with whatever the discomfort is, or I'm going to go back to live with whatever the discomfort is about it. So I'm just going to pick if you're focused on your breathing, right? There was probably a point in time in your life that you weren't focused on your breathing, Natalie, and you were able to just breathe and not even care about the fact you were breathing. But then one day OCD might have just grabbed onto that and said, was that a good enough breath? Did you breathe well enough? And maybe you should pay attention to that. And then after a while, it became every breath was something that was focused on and paid attention to. And now, did I get enough oxygen in that time? And what if I didn't? And what would it mean about me? And am I purposely holding my breath? And does that mean that I don't want to get enough air in? And does that mean that I have suicidal themes because now I'm trying not to get enough air in and yada, yada, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. And so, Natalie, first of all, it would be if you've run tests, you've done the test. You probably don't need to do any more, right? And you're going to trust that. If you've seen experts, you're going to go with what the experts tell you. You're going to follow some of that advice. And if it's so much focus kind of on a bodily sensation or something like that, it's embracing the fact that you have that bodily sensation without trying to stop thinking about it or neutralize it or any way, because there's no way you're going to be able to do that. So it's becoming okay with the fact that, yes, I am a breathing human being. I'm a blinking human being. And there isn't a right or wrong way to blink or breathe in this kind of situation in the way that OCD is looking at it. And I don't need to follow along with what OCD wants me to do. Okay. Hopefully that's helpful. We are a third of the way through, everyone. So NoCD tonight welcomes you to our Wednesday night webinar. Our webinar is our weekly little Q&A with everyone, just to kind of say hi and help answer some of your questions about obsessive compulsive disorder. And it's not only for people who have OCD, but friends or family as well too are welcome. Know that the advice given on this is not therapy, and please consult with a therapist if you want to follow up on things. You can download the NoCD app at Google Play or iOS, and you can reach out to us at nocd.com. And we do therapy in the UK, Canada, Australia, and the United States as well. User says, hello, doctor. You've committed bad acts from the ages of 14 and 15, and now you're 17 and your brain is not letting you move on since you may have hurt someone. Do you have any tips of how I could cope? I feel so irredeemable and guilty. Well, remember that, first of all, a bad act to OCD doesn't mean that it's a bad act to anybody else. So first, that's one of the first things that we have to consider. OCD's moral compass is quite different than pretty much the rest of the world's moral compass is. So I don't know that you've actually done a bad act or not. I can't say, right? And just because you may have done something at 14 and 15, how much punishment do you need for it now, from your own self? I mean, is there ability to learn a lesson of, wow, I look back and I'm not proud of the fact that I did that thing. I'm going to make sure I don't do that again in the future. Or do you need OCD to constantly remind you that you've done something, and without the reminder of OCD that you've done it and the guilt that you feel from it, that you would potentially do it again? Because that's the tact of OCD. The tact of OCD is basically saying, if you didn't have me around, you wouldn't keep in your head that you've done something. And if you didn't keep in your head that you've done something, you might forget that you did it. And if you forget that you did it, well, then you might be prone to repeat it. And if you'd be prone to repeat it, wouldn't that be horrible? Because I'm going to be here to remind you not to repeat it. And that's my job, and my goal in life is to constantly remind you, hey, you have done bad things, quote unquote, and I'm going to make sure that I prevent that from ever happening again, to save you from the awful and horribleness of having done something bad. And that's the way it works. So again, user, bad has to be in quotes when I'm talking to people with OCD. Because believe me, I've heard people describe things they think is bad that I might do daily, right? And to them, it's the epitome of awfulness. And to me, it's normal, right? Swearing, for example. I do that. That could be one thing right there. So there's lots of things, and I just can't trust that the word bad is actually something bad. So just want to throw that out there. Kaylee says, hey, Dr. McGrath, just stopping to say hi. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family. Thanks for all you do. Thanks, Kaylee. Good to see you as always. Kaylee, loyal listener. Appreciate it. Leg XC, is it normal that even though your brain is searching for an answer, you personally don't want to find it, since that would mean that your worst life-ruining fears would be a reality? Sure. I mean, that sounds OCD to me, right? Keep searching. Hope we don't find it, though. But we got to keep looking. Anyway. No stone must be left unturned in the world of OCD, just so that we can find out. I mean, we sure don't want to find out that we are XYZ, but were we to discover that, then at least there's one thing that comes out of it. We can be adequately punished for it, right? Because there are so many people with OCD who feel they absolutely deserve punishment. And so they're constantly looking for reasons why they should be punished for something, because only then are they able to try to become a good person who first pays for their sins before they are acceptable, right? Bad people must come with a clean slate before being accepted. Well, I don't know anybody who hasn't done something potentially bad or wrong, but boy, when you have OCD, it sure likes to find things. And then you say there, and how do you deal with real event false memory OCD that progressed to the point that you basically deduced, made up an answer you're still unsure of? Do you continue to live in uncertainty? Again, we have to live in uncertainty. I don't know anyone who does live in certainty. So therefore, we have to live in uncertainty. I can't tell you everything that I did yesterday. How much then should I think about the worst case scenario of what I might have done? I can't remember every email I sent yesterday. So does that mean I should search every email to make sure that I didn't just totally defame someone or something like that in every email? Since I can't remember every email and I have uncertainty about every email that I did. If I had OCD and it said Well, maybe then you sent a really derogatory email to someone. You better check every email that you send through all the emails that you have just to make sure that you didn't do that. Should I do that? That would be giving into the compulsion, and I might feel better afterwards. But then what OCD might say, are you sure you saw them all? Maybe you should check again. Or maybe it was actually 2 days ago that you did it. And though you also looked 2 days ago, did you really look hard enough? I don't remember that you did. You might not have. Maybe it'd be best just to go back through every email you've ever sent in your life, just to make sure that nothing was said inappropriate to anybody, right? Where does it end is the thing. Is there an ability to find a point where we just say, now I've satisfied everything, we're all good? Well, no, because OCD has never done that. I've never once met a person with OCD whose OCD finally became satisfied by something. But I sure know everyone with OCD who says, I've had to learn to live with the fact that I can't satisfy my OCD. As uncomfortable as that might be, it's also impossible to satisfy OCD. So you have to learn to live with that discomfort. EB says intrusive thoughts are often irrational. Yeah, but what if they are rational thoughts attacking beliefs that lack evidence, like miracles or love is more than brain chemicals? Well, there are people who are approaching that from an academic point of view and are then able to leave that at school or at work or something like that and go home and be with their friends and family and just enjoy things, right? OCD, though, doesn't take any time off. OCD is constantly thinking about it. So there are cognitive psychologists who look at the way brain chemicals work and what is love and emotion and how do we experience it and how do we encode memories and language and all those kinds of things. But again, they see the 5 o'clock on the clock there, and they're like, oh, hey, time to go home. I'm good. I'll come back tomorrow and I'll pick this up there. OCD says 5 o'clock and says, hey, we're just getting started. Here we go. Let's continue on. There's no breaks in OCD world, right? There's no crying in baseball, that kind of thing, right? You got to constantly be working on this stuff, because how dare you leave any stone unturned, right? You need to always be knowing all the information all the time. And if you don't know all the information all the time, you're slacking, right? And slacking is bad. There's no slacking allowed, right? You must figure everything out all the time. And going back to EB's thing here, EB, you put a phrase that I love in here, which is, yeah, but what if, which is one of my favorite phrases to talk about, because if anything identifies obsessive compulsive disorder, it is what if, and what if's cousin, which is, yeah, but what if. And when those things show up in questions to me, I know that I can't give an answer, because it doesn't matter what kind of logical answer I give, your OCD will use OCD logic and yeah, but what if anything that I say, to the point that there won't be any answer that I could ever give that would ever be satisfying, because you will always have one more yeah, but what if than I will have rational answer. So it's just not possible, right? It's just not possible whatsoever to be able to tell you everything that you would want to know, and to make rational everything that you would want to make rational. We can't get there. Lynn says, hi, Dr. McGrath. Hello. You're struggling with sexual orientation OCD so badly, and at this point it's convinced you that you're in denial, which you know you're not. How can one overcome this subtype? Well, isn't that interesting? I'm just going to point out your sentence here. It has convinced me that I'm in denial. So that sounds like you're convinced. But then you say, but you know you're not. So then you're not convinced. So isn't this dichotomy interesting here, just as you present it, that this is what OCD does? On one hand, you say, OCD has convinced me that I'm in denial. And that's kind of on that emotional part of the brain, right? And then that logical part of the brain responds and says, but I know I'm not. So how does one overcome this subtype, right? Well, how about this? You've got some decisions to make here, Lynn, right? And to me, the decision is Though OCD attempts to convince you of something, why must you believe it is true? That's where we have to start. Why must you believe it is true? How has it actually convinced you when then you reply with, but I know I'm not? Right? There's a problem, as you can see in that sense. You can't be convinced and not convinced at the same time, right? Those things work. Unless, again, we're talking on different planes. I'm convinced emotionally because that's where OCD is occurring in the brain. I'm not convinced logically because that's where I'm at in my brain. But I've got a fight going on between the emotional side of my brain and the logical side of my brain. And there's this war, this hemispheres, right? Are the heart and mind united in a single perfect sphere, or is there a splinter that is going on in this kind of situation? And right now, they're splintered, right? They're not together. And so we've got to take a look at which one of these are you going to go with? Are you going to go with the OCD and the emotional side, which says you're in denial? Are you going to go with the logical side, which says, well, I know I'm not, but I have these what ifs? And my whole goal, if I was treating you, Lynn, would be to get you to be able to sit with those what ifs and recognize, yes, that is where the OCD comes in those what if experiences. And I don't actually have to pay any attention to them whatsoever. What do you know? Isn't that awesome? No need to pay attention to something because it is OCD. I mean, why in the world would OCD ever need to have any attention paid to it whatsoever? That's a question for all of you to ponder tonight. Why would anyone ever give OCD the time of day? I mean, it's a jackass, right? It's an idiot. It's going to be like the annoying aunt or uncle or cousin or whatever relative or a friend of the family that is going to be at your Thanksgiving tomorrow. And they may be just getting under your skin and annoying, but you could always go into another room and just not pay any attention to those people, right? And you might say, yeah, but I can't do that with OCD because my head is attached to my body. So wherever my body goes, so goes my brain, right? And therefore OCD goes with. And you're absolutely right. OCD is always going to be that passenger with you. But you could also stay in the same room with someone and have a perfectly lovely conversation with someone else in the room and pay no attention to the fact that that thing is going on there, right? If you've gone to a restaurant, you could listen to every other table's conversation, or you could focus on the conversation that you're having with the date that you're on, or something like that. You have the ability to be able to focus on something. Now, that's not saying, oh, you're saying distraction. No, I'm saying I want you to live your life. And even if OCD is going to be bumping into it once in a while, you don't have to let it intrude, right? You could open the door and be like, oh, you OCD. Yeah, no, and close that door again, and go that route. So I hope that, Lynn, that makes some sense to you of how you want to look at this. Sidley, how to manage when game OCD or harm. Harm OCD, you would, well, ERP is how you would manage things. And that's always what we want to do for managing OCD is utilizing exposure and response prevention. So Master Ends 1 says they have a question. When you go to church and sit in the pew, you feel like you have to look behind you and repeat people's name in your head, the people behind me. What's good ERP? First of all, you could look behind you and not say their name. You could not look behind you and say their name. You could look behind you 2 rows and not say their name. You could spend the whole church looking only sideways or front and not look behind you at all and not say any names at all. If you do look at someone and you say their name, you find yourself doing a compulsion, then I want you to say, or wait, is their name Jim or Frank or whatever, else it is, and start throwing some doubt into that experience as well too, instead of saying the name of it and being confident in it, right? So scratch it up a little bit, right? Make it something that's just different than what you're doing, because what you're doing, those are compulsions. And so how do we get you to do the opposite? How do we get you to do something different? I don't want you to do the compulsion. I want you to do something else instead. That's ultimately what I want to see you do. Okay. Also, how do you deal with harm OCD when it tells you and convinces you that you're a bad person and that you will do all these horrible things? Well, I mean, OCD again. Here's the convincing thing again. Well, we found the theme of the night, everyone. Convinced or not convinced, right? OCD may try to convince you of these things, but just because OCD tells you you're going to do something, does that mean you're going to do it? I mean, you've all heard me use my example. I'll do it again. Here we go, everybody. You ready? At some point, I might leave this webinar and I might go across the street with a Molotov cocktail and throw it at my neighbor Dave's house. Then I'm going to go in the middle of the street, take a poop in a bag. I'm going to light it on fire. I'm going to put it in front of my neighbor Josh's house. I'm going to ring the doorbell. He's going to play a little ding dong ditch, and he's going to come out and see the bag on fire, stomp on it. And it's going to have poop on his shoe, and I'm going to laugh. And then there might be some geese flying over to the pond behind me. I'll shoot the geese, and then I'm going to come back here and I'm going to finish my webinar. So, Sidley, my brain has now convinced me that I am a bad person and I'm going to do that. So what should I do to prevent it from happening? I am now 100% convinced that one day that is going to happen. Should I move? Should I get rid of any alcohol in the house so that I can't throw a Molotov cocktail? Should I not buy any brown bags so that I can't poop into a bag and light it on fire? Should I get rid of any implements that could light anything on fire whatsoever? How should I approach this, Italy? Because I am now absolutely 100% convinced that this is going to happen. Or can I even be convinced it's going to happen and recognize that just because I'm convinced it's going to happen doesn't actually mean that it will? I mean, my being convinced of something doesn't make it happen. I have known people who love sports, which I can't understand. I don't get the whole sports thing, why everybody's just so into that. But whatever. But who have said to me, I am 100% convinced that our team is going to win the game tonight. There is no doubt about it. We have to. And then their team loses. Well, how did that happen? Hey, you were 100% convinced. You that's what you said. You were absolutely convinced that your team was going to win, and they didn't win. Why not? Well, the other team did this and this. It doesn't matter. You were convinced. Your convincing takes into account all of those potentials. How are you convinced that your team was going to win and they lost? I don't pay attention to the fact that people are convinced about things. You might be convinced about something, but to me, it still doesn't make me believe that it's true, right? Convinced and truth are very different things. So be convinced all you want, but I don't have to believe it. And that's how I approach things as a therapist. Like, if I've treated people who have an elevator phobia, right? I'll stand next to them and they're quaking in their boots about getting on an elevator. And I'll say, all right, tell me every single bad thing that could potentially happen if I were to get on an elevator. Like, well, it could crash, there could be a fire, you could suffocate. And they run through the gamut of all of the things that could happen on an elevator. And I'll say, okay, cool. I'm going to go ride the elevator now. And I go ride the elevator and then I get back out and I say, oh, well, look, didn't happen. Guess I got lucky. I'll try again. And ride it again. Now they're convinced that if they get on the elevator, they're going to die. I have every bit of information about how scary elevators might be because they've shared it with me. I'm not convinced. Okay. So just because you're convinced of something, Sidley, doesn't mean anybody else is. And that's how I work with people of getting you to recognize that, again, an OCD trickery right there. Love Lana says hi. Hey, Love Lana, good to see you again. Happy to have you. Prajwal says, what to do if I can't afford therapy? How can I get better myself? Why is it that only through therapy I can get better? Well, as well. There are some self-help books that you can get started on to start reading about OCD and maybe help to get a hierarchy developed or something. See if there's some free support groups in your area that might be available to you. Reach out to NoCD, especially if you're in a different country. We are running a program right now for anybody outside of the United States. If you sign up with NoCD before the end of the year, get your first session in. That first session and all sessions for 3 months will be $100. So try that out, and maybe that could be helpful to you as well, and hopefully a little bit more affordable too. Chris Gamer RV says, hello, you're suffering from false memory OCD. I don't have a memory of doing this thing, but I'm unsure of how to cope with it. What are some strategies? So your OCD has convinced you that you might have do something, though you don't actually have a memory of it. Okay. I go again, Chris, with my example earlier, that I don't have a memory of throwing a Molotov cocktail at my neighbor Dave's house, but I can still be pretty convinced of it, that I did it, even though I have no recollection of it whatsoever, right? Because that's where false memory OCD could come in and give you those things. So I'm going to go with this. I've never once trusted the path of OCD to be the thing that I'm going to go down, right? The path of OCD is not the one that I want to have people follow, or that I'm going to follow as a therapist as well too. So when you say to me false memories and that you don't have a memory of doing something, say, okay, well, that's what we're going to go with. So now, how do we sit with the fact that you might be comfortable about something that you don't know, right? And that's where we learn to live with discomfort. I mean, really, isn't that the goal of all work with OCD, about how do we allow ourselves to live in discomfort? Chris, there's no way for me, based on your question, I'm going to go with, because I'm going to bet you've also asked other people, there's no way for me or anybody else to convince you that something is or isn't true, did or didn't happen. And so the thing that I think is most important there is, you say you're unsure about something. I want you to lean into that unsureness about it. I want you to lean into that experience of not knowing and recognize that that's a normal, natural human kind of experience of not fully knowing. As far as I know, there's less than 20 people in the world that have photographic memories, right? So science studies these people because, like, wow, how does that work? Because no one else really has this. But it's almost as if your OCD is saying to you, oh, I got to punish you for not having a photographic memory. And boy, since you can't remember everything, what could be the worst thing that you could have potentially done? And then let's get you to worry and wonder about if you might have done it, because now you can't remember if you did or didn't do it anyway. So yeah, this sounds like good punishment. We're going to go along the lines of, you may have done this. Let's punish you for the fact that you may have done it, because you don't remember what you actually did. So we'll just fill in the blank with the worst case scenario we could possibly find, and we'll go with that to be the probable truth, right? Now, you probably wouldn't throw that on anybody else and get them to want to believe things that way, but I'm going to bet that it seems to make sense to you. And here's one thing that I kind of use with people is this. If the thing that you tell yourself wouldn't make sense to anybody else, OCD is probably involved. Right? If anybody else would say, what the heck are you talking about? That's ridiculous, I'm going to go with OCD. It just seems to fit the bill there pretty well. David says, you've seen 4 OCD therapists in the past year and have done ERP several months with no results. Should you consider Houston McLean Center? Possible, yeah. I mean, there's several residentials out there. There's the Houston McLean Center, wonderful. Liz McInvale runs it. Hi, Liz, doing a great job. There's the McLean out in Boston as well, too, that residential. There's the Foglia Family Foundation Residential Treatment Center, which is outside of Chicago, part of Amita Health. And then there's the Neurobehavioral Institute, NBI, which is down in Miami. So you've got several kinds of options for higher level of care if that might be something that you need, David. But also check the International OCD Foundation website to see if there might be a more intensive program in your area as well, too. Lasha says, hi, Dr. McGrath. Thank you for these wonderful live streams. Your question is, how do you learn to trust yourself to know when you're actually in danger when OCD lies and constantly sends false alarms? Well, one thing, Lasha, is you're with a group of people and you notice nobody else is reacting the way you're reacting, then maybe that's one of the things to say to you, this could be an OCD type of thing. If also you would find yourself that you wouldn't give the advice that your OCD is giving you to anybody else, that might be a good recognition that really it's OCD playing a role in this as well, too, because there's no way you would tell anybody else to do what you're about to go do, right? So those would be two things right off the bat that I would really consider about how you can tell if it's an OCD kind of lie and false alarm being sent at you. Also, if you've done it more than once and you found it relieving and now you're finding that it's creeping back in and you want to do the same thing again, good for pattern recognition of obsessive compulsive disorder as well in that kind of scenario. Hopefully those help. Madeline says, having a hard time accepting getting better. It's almost like your anxiety was confirmation that it's OCD. How do you tackle this point of recovery journey? You're still anxious, but not nearly as bad. Well, Madeline, thank you, because this question comes up pretty much every single webinar that I do, where people are afraid to get better. Because if I'm afraid to get better, then I'm not paying attention to everything. And if I'm not paying attention to everything, then I'm sorry. If I get better, then I'm not paying attention to everything. And if I don't pay attention to everything, it could mean that something sneaks up on me, or it could also mean that now that I'm getting better, I'm not having the feelings that I had about things before. And if I'm no longer having the abhorrent feelings that I had about X, Y, or Z, does that mean now that I like that thing? Because I would think everybody would have abhorrent feelings about X, Y, Z. Did my OCD therapist numb me to feelings about that? No. We got you to the point of recognizing that you can have a feeling towards something that doesn't have to go to the level of an OCD type of feeling, right? For example, somebody might be disgusted by something and their OCD ramps it up and has them do everything that they possibly can to make sure they never do that, and all these compulsions. I might also be disgusted by it and think, okay, I'm just never going to do that. And that's enough, right? I don't need the compulsion part of it to prevent me from doing it. But the OCD part says, boy, we just can't take any chances whatsoever that thing might actually occur at some point in time. I mean, what if possibility did equal probability? And since it is possible for somebody to do that thing, doesn't mean it's highly probable that you would do it. Well, of course, in OCD logic, it does. And therefore, boy, you better just go back to really hating that thing and constantly be on the lookout for it and feeling that it's in danger and not trusting yourself or anything like that. So, Lasha, I may be just as disgusted as you are about something, but I don't need to do the compulsions as a way to prevent me from doing it, because I'll just recognize that, oh, well, I don't want to do that then. And that's good enough, right? That's just good enough. Now, good enough might be a hard thing for people with OCD to accept, right? Good enough? Is there such a thing as good enough? Well, not in OCD language, there's not. Because in OCD, it's never good enough. It's always falling short in OCD. So we want people to get to the point of being okay with things being good enough and hope that it's okay with that. Leslie says, do you guys take medical? Sorry, Leslie, don't know what that means. Like insurance? We do take insurance here in the US, if that's what you're thinking. And so, yes, please reach out to nocd.com and hit the therapist button there. And up in the upper right corner, you can do the find help, and we'll do a 15-minute call with you. So it's only Tuesday, but it's Wednesday. Says, hi, thank you for your time and wonderful service. Can you explain a backdoor spike? What is it and how is it treated? Yeah, sure. I think we all have a little different definitions of this, but you go through OCD treatment, you're feeling better, and then now you're going to have doubt about feeling better. Like, wait a minute, kind of what we were talking about earlier. Here's how I look at it. I used to be really bothered by this, and now I'm not. Oh my gosh, what does that say about me that I'm no longer bothered by it? Now I'm anxious about not being bothered by it. Okay. Well, you went through therapy in order to learn how to not be so bothered by it, but now you're worried that you're not so bothered by it. Now, do you need therapy for that? So how do I treat it? I teach people that it happens and to look out for it and to recognize that just because it happens doesn't mean that you have to do anything about it. That's what I would do. The nice DD77 says, what's the end of untreated pure O? It would be probably a lifetime of pure O. I would think is what it would be. So that's why we would want people to be treated. Now, the oldest person I treated was in his late 80s and finally said, I've had OCD for 70 years and I don't want to die with OCD. So I'd like to have a few years remaining without OCD. And we treated him and he did fantastic. So you don't have to have a life of untreated something. There are ways to get treatment, and nice DD77. I hope that you will reach out for those things because we at OCD would be happy to help you. Mary says you're full of guilt and shame about things you did that affected others years ago after a trauma. How does ERP work when your major uncertainty is that you will always feel guilt and shame? I kind of answered this earlier with some other question that was pretty similar, Mary. So hopefully you were able to hear that one. If not, you can go back and re-listen to this one. It will get posted up on our YouTube site. But really to recognize that you say there, the major uncertainty is that you will always feel guilt or shame. The guilt or shame comes from constantly reminding yourself that you should feel guilt and shame. There are plenty of people who have done things that have paid the price for them and have some people have done time for them. Other people have repented for them. Other people have just said, you know what, boy, I'm never going to do that again. There's a whole list of gamut from big to small, the way that you react to it or you deal with it or that you might be judged by it or something like that, who can move on and not be haunted every day by it as well too. So, but Mary, check out that earlier answer. I think that it will be potentially helpful to you. Let's see. Red DCG says you were just diagnosed with OCD a little over a month ago. You think your primary theme is moral scrupulosity. Can people have a primary theme but still have intrusive thoughts about other topics or themes? Absolutely, right? Remember, OCD doesn't really discriminate. So if it sees something to grab onto, it's going to grab onto it. So you may have a kind of a pretty common primary type of theme, but there could be a few other things that love to sneak themselves in there as well too. So yes, that is going to happen for sure. Eliza J says, I do mental compulsions or neutralizing every second of the day, even before an intrusive thought comes in, as a way to block it out from ever entering your mind and to be ready in case it gets through. Any tips on dealing with this automatic nature of mental compulsions? You do it a lot without even wanting to. Your mind just begins to do your compulsion whenever it's not doing anything else. I love a loop tape in this kind of scenario. And if you're working with a therapist, I think they can help you set this up. I've worked with people where we've created a loop tape of things that would be uncomfortable to hear and then just play that on constant loop all the time, because then there's going to come a point where you're working or doing other things in your life and you're not going to be able to neutralize it. And you're just going to have to live with the fact that it's sitting out there in your mind and everything like that without a neutralization having been done. And hopefully over time you realize, oh, look, there were so many times I heard that thing today without getting a chance to neutralize it. And did the worst case scenario happen? Doesn't appear to have. And if you can do that with yourself and allow yourself to learn that you don't actually have to neutralize everything that pops into your head and even pre-neutralize anything that might pop into your head, I think that it'll start to get better for you. I think that you'll start to actually feel better if that's the case. So I hope, Eliza J, that is the case for you. All right. Let me just move down to the bottom here for a moment, and we're getting toward the end here. Lots of thank yous. Awesome. Well, thank you all. And good for all of you supporting each other as well too. People like the what ifs, so that's good. Awesome. Starve OCD. It's get bored. Yes. Starving. Stop feeding the OCD. It wants food. Jenna Overbaugh is here tonight, by the way. Hi Jenna. Mike Sizemore. Hi, Mike. Good good to see you as well too. Some friends of mine. Happy to have you on here. Um, Christina says at 7:16, oh my God, that is my brain. Good. Again, I'm so happy if I can, without OCD, even be able to kind of give you a little bit of idea of the way your brain might work. Now, let me just spend a couple of the last minutes here. Obviously, for those of you here in the US, it's the holiday, right? There's a Thanksgiving tomorrow, and some of you may feel like you need to be alone, right? Because your OCD says you can't be around anybody and you don't want to be responsible for something bad happening to other people, passing on some kind of disease to them or contaminant or something of that nature. What if you were to say something inappropriate to anybody and be morally offensive to them? Or there's children that are going to be there and you can't be around children because what if you were to do something inappropriate with them or something like that? So my challenge to all of you is to not let OCD get in the way of you being with friends or family, right? That what you will feel in the moment of not going to see people is OCD saying, oh, this is so great that we're just here alone and we're not around anybody else. But I fear that the regret that you will feel after the day is done is, oh man, I really wish I would have seen those people. It would have been so nice to hang out with friends or family, cousins, those types of things as well too. So I'm going to challenge people, right, for Thanksgiving to not feed the OCD the turkey and the pie and the mashed potatoes and the lovely green bean casserole and that delicious stuffing. I'm going to challenge you to feed living your life even though you have OCD, which means getting out of your comfort zone and not doing everything that OCD wants you to do, right? Some of you may think, how can I be thankful? How can I have a Thanksgiving when I have OCD? But then, let's look at things like what just happened in Wisconsin with the parade, right? Where people went out to have just a joyous time, and some people were killed by the actions of a person who just, had no regard for their life or anything like that. And you might say, well, isn't it just then a scary world and I can't go out and do anything because what if that happens? And you know what? You're right. It is frightening to think about. I'm not going to lie, right? It can be frightening to think about that. But there's also probably 10,000 parades that happen around Thanksgiving, and that happened at one of them. And so it goes to show us the reality of things, right? Could negative things happen? Sure. You've never once heard me say to any of you, that's not going to happen. That can't ever happen or anything like that. I'm not here to tell you what will or won't happen, right? I want all of you to be able to sit with and recognize and live with the fact that, yeah, my brain comes up with the worst case scenario. And heck, maybe in some way, somehow, somewhere, could that worst case scenario happen? Potential, right? But am I going to let that rule my life? Just going back to that beginning thing that we said, since there's a potential that anybody getting into a car tomorrow to drive to see relatives could get in a car accident, does that mean, you know what, no one's going to go visit anybody tomorrow because there's a potential that I could get into a car accident? I think everybody driving somewhere tomorrow knows that that is a potential, right? But people also know that there's other things that outweigh the risk as well. And that's where I want all of you to kind of focus on is like, what outweighs the risk of what OCD is telling you? Because in outweighing the risk of what OCD tells you, you get a lot, right? You start to live your life. You start to be rewarded. You see friends, you see family, you hang out with people. You get to experience potential for love and joy and awesome and great things. And that's what I hope for all of you. I always appreciate having all of you here every week, right? I really do. And if I can get across to all of you the notion that you don't have to believe what your OCD tells you, and you don't have to live your life according to it for everything to go okay. Because I bet if you talk to people who've had OCD for years and years, they'll say, you know what? It doesn't matter how long I have OCD, I still don't feel okay. Right? OCD doesn't bring about a feeling of okay. because that's just not the way that it works. So my best goes out to all of you this holiday season, tomorrow for Thanksgiving, and I hope all of you will take the advantage of being able to get out of your comfort zone a little bit and challenge your OCD and be thankful for the fact that you had the chance to do so. Have a good one, everyone. Just